And welcome to another edition of Murphy's Hockey Law. I'm your host, Jimmy Murphy, of course, produced by Blake Thorne. He's not with us today, but he will be doing some wonderful editing as he always does. And I'm joined by an old friend, and you Boston Bruins fans might recognize him. It's Dave Goucher, who is now the TV play-by-play man for the Vegas Golden Knights, the defending Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights. Goucher, how you doing?
Good, Murph. Still hard to believe when you put it that way, the defending Stanley Cup champs. No, it's been great. It's obviously been a wild ride in Vegas over 6 years, and can't believe they've already won the cup. But it's been an unbelievable experience, to say the least.
Yeah, and you know, so we'll go back in time here a bit. I want to start off with your days in Boston, and even back to the Providence days, because I don't know if you remember too, Goucher. We had met each other before I got into hockey media. I met you through Tommy Hohol from Holyoke, Mass.
Oh, Tommy Hohol, sure do. Yep, old ticket rep for the P Bruins.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to him?
He wound up back in Springfield doing insurance and stuff, and moved back to Holyoke. He's got
Love Tommy, now. Hilarious. Yeah. He's hilarious.
He was a character, and I just remember when he had his day. You guys won the Calder, remember, in '99?
Yeah.
And he had his day with the Calder Cup, and he brought it to Holyoke. And there's an old bar called Brennan's. It's actually still there, like everything else in Holyoke. And we went down there, we're partying with it, and somehow or another, he just forgot the cup.
Not surprised.
And we get back to this after hours at somebody's house, and the bar owner, Pat Brennan, calls, and he says, "Hey, you guys left somebody here." And Tommy's like, "Who?" And he's like, "The Calder Cup." That's you, Tommy, you moron.
That's right. I didn't know we did days with the Calder Cup back then. I don't even think I got a day. He got a day.
Maybe he swindled it somehow, but yeah.
He might have just stole it for a day.
He stole it. Knowing Tommy, that's what happened. But it was an adventure, as everything is with Tommy Hohol. But yeah, take it back to those days, Gouche. You're with Providence and you come on with Boston. Just for our listeners out there, how did you get into radio, into play-by-play?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the short version, Murph. I mean, I went to BU, and I'll back it up a little bit further. I had played hockey as a kid since I was probably 5, 6 years old. Always my favorite sport. Played hockey, baseball, played some tennis in high school as well. And the idea with going to BU was twofold. One was I wanted to try to walk on the hockey team there. But here's the issue. They had guys like Keith Kachuk and Tony Amonte and Sean McEachern and the Sacco brothers, and they didn't need me. So the other thought with going to BU is they had one of the best communications programs in the country. So I went there in my junior year. I started to do like a weekly radio DJ show. But my junior and senior year, I did the BU hockey games. I did BU football, hockey, football, baseball. 2 of those 3 they don't have anymore, obviously, in football and baseball. But hockey was the one I had focused on because I don't know, I just kind of thought, if I'm not going to be able to play professionally, which that was not going to happen, I wanted to try and stay involved in the game somehow.
That's exactly why I got into journalism.
Yeah, right. And broadcasting was always, my cousins would tell you that I was the kid that when we were playing street hockey or wiffle ball as kids, I would be the one announcing the game as we were playing it, home run or whatever. So they would tell you I've been doing this since I was 8. But yeah, so I did 2 years of games, mainly hockey at BU back in the days of cassette tapes. And I still have in my garage in Vegas most of the cassette tapes from those days, which, they weren't very good. They just were not very good.
Yeah, but that's great to keep.
Good enough, right? Yeah, good enough to get me a job. And then, and then I say, Murph, you kind of chase it, right? I went to the East Coast League for 2 years in Wheeling, West Virginia. Great people down there. And it was Wheeling's about an hour from Pittsburgh. And it was right after the Pens had won back-to-back in 91 and 92. So very rich hockey environment. So I was in the East Coast League for 2 years. And then did the P Bruins for 5, including, as you mentioned, the Calder Cup year in 99. And then Bob Newmeyer, God rest him, my 5 years doing the P Bruins, he was doing the Bruins games for WBZ Radio at the time. And he had decided that, he wasn't going to do it forever, but he decided he was going to do other things. He's a multi-talented guy, right? So threw my hat in the ring, and it kind of dwindled it down from 60 to 50 to 5 to 3, and then somehow, some way, I was when the music stopped, I had a chair, you know. So yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of how it all happened.
Nice. And you know, ironically, you know, we've been talking obviously around here, and we'll get into it a little more. I mean, Patrice Bergeron came on early in your career. He comes to the Bruins too. So we'll get to that in a bit. But I want to go back to what, you know, when you won when the Bruins won the cup and you're there, and just that season, you know, what was it like as you start to feel like, all right, this team's on a run here and they got a chance. What was that like?
Yeah, the playoffs I remember mostly, Murph, was kind of a roller coaster of emotion because you have to, as you would recall, you know, that team, I kind of take it from when Claude Julien got there in 07, 08, right?
Right.
They make the playoffs that year. Probably, you know, they got in late, but it was an achievement just to get there. They lost in 7. But that kind of was the rebirth because they weren't, you know, my first 6, 7 years, they weren't very good. You know, they had the Dave Lewis year. There was a lockout year. They had a rough year after the lockout under Mike Sullivan. Brought in Dave Lewis. He only lasted a year. So Claude was kind of the start of them turning it around. And but, you know, then in 09, they had the best record in the East. They got upset by Carolina in 7 games in the second round. The next year, the whole Flyers thing, you know, the 3-0, 3-0.
Yep.
So by the time you get to 2011, you know, I think you wanted to see, like, is this team going to be able to do something in the playoffs or not? And I remember they were down. They lost the first 2 games at home to Montreal in the first round. Yeah. And you're thinking, you know, this might, now they're going to win 4 out of 5, including they're going to have to win at least 2 in Montreal. And
right.
Jack Edwards and I, here's the geniuses we are. We were sitting up there at the morning skate at the Bell Center and before game 3, and we're like, well, they're probably not going to win this series. The coach is going to be gone. The goalie will be gone. We had about $15 million off the salary cap in 5 minutes. You know, Recky's going to retire, and the next thing you know, they were having a parade through the city. So I just, you know, they had to get through that first round. You know, the second round against the Flyers, that was personal for those guys because they had what happened the year before.
Yep.
The Tampa series was unbelievable. That 7th game is still probably the best game I've seen in person. The 1-0 game, and then and even the finals though was a roller coaster. You know, they lose the first 2 games out there, and lose one was in overtime. Early Burrows scored, I think, in overtime, and then was it Rafi Torres maybe scored late in game 2? I might have those flipped, but either way, they lose the first 2 games.
Oh yeah, you have it right. Yep.
Yeah, but then they were the games back in Boston. The Bruins were so dominant. Yeah, dominant. You know, 3, 4, and 6 were just blowouts, and it's a funny aside, but I have a chart, you know, a line chart I do on each team, and for the rest of Roberto Luongo's career, I just for my own amusement, I had his goals against and save percentage of the 3 games in Boston in the finals. You know, and it was like 15.5 goals against or whatever, and then you know they get to the 7th game and. You don't know what to expect, but you know they had already, you know, beaten the Canadiens and beaten Tampa earlier in the playoffs. And, you know, when I look back at it, Murph, that 7th game, as you remember, wasn't very close. I mean, it was 4-0. It could have been 7-0. I mean, it was a dominant performance. So, that was, you know, up until a month and a half ago was, you know, the only chance I'd had to be around the team that won it. But, you know, you remember that those memories stay with you forever.
Now, we'll get in. Now let's talk about Bergeron. And, you know, he retires, and obviously sure shot Hall of Famer here, and just so many Bergeron stories going around right now. And of course, you know, the most one that gets the most play, the highlight is your call, Game 7 against the Leafs. I mean, I think I might have heard that probably 30 times in the last week.
Save Romer, rebound loose at the top of the crease. Richard score! Bergeron in Game 7, and the Bruins win the series.
Take us to that game, and you know, also for the listeners out there that aren't familiar with play-by-play and doing it like you, what is it like? Like, how does a moment like that manifest? Do you dream about it in your head? Do you plan for something like that, or is it just sort of come about and you make the call?
Yeah, that one, Murph, was pretty organic, right? Because it was so out of the blue. I mean, it's funny when the day Bergeron retired down here in Rhode Island, we had Nesson on. They were rerunning it, and I rerunning Game 7. of that series. And I clicked it on just by chance when they were down 4-1 with 11 minutes left. So I was like, well, I'll stick around and see how this turns out, you know? Yep. And no, I think that, you know, for that moment, well, a little bit, like I said, they were down 4-1 with 10 or 11 minutes left. And at the time, I had my, you know, our booth there at the Garden. I had my phone on the little desk we had, and I was looking at it, and my buddies were texting me, "This sucks. Can you play golf tomorrow?"
Same here. Yep.
Right. So I got to a point I was sick of reading them. I didn't want to read them anymore. So I put my phone out of reach purposely. And then all of a sudden they get it to 4-2, 4-3. And then Bergie tied it with 50 seconds left. And then I remember the intermission between the third period and overtime. Then I looked at my phone again, and the tone of the text completely changed. You know, they might actually be able to pull this off. And then, but I will say, you know, there was still a thought that they could lose this game. You know, they hadn't, you know, I forgot before I watched the rerun the other day on Neston that when it was 4-2 in the third, was it Matt Fratton had a breakaway with 4 minutes left, and he missed the net. If he scores, it's 5-2, the whole thing's over.
That's it.
You know, Joffrey Lupul had an unbelievable chance, probably 4 minutes into overtime for the Leafs, and I think Tuukka got his skate on it. So, but anyway, you know, those sometimes those get lost in the shuffle of comebacks like that. But, you know, when Bergie scored, I've always kind of wondered, like, why did because I normally never say a guy's name more than once.
Yeah.
But I said his twice, and the only thing I keep coming back to was, if you watch the video, he jumps up in the air twice.
Yeah.
And that's about as scientific as I could make it as to why I would have said his name more than once, yelling like a banshee. So anyway, it was it was strictly just organic. I think some of it was probably just disbelief that they actually had won the game and found a way to win the game. And, you know, and you don't think of it in the moment that, you know, how many more times you're going to hear it. But, you know, and then obviously I'm glad it worked out the way it did. And then for that team, that really propelled them. They beat the Rangers in 5. They swept the Penguins, and they were on their way to the final.
Yeah. And of course, that was the year too of, you know, the marathon bombings too. So it was just the emotion in that building is what I'll never forget. Just and then they, you know, even though they lost that, there was something, you know, I don't know if you can say you're happy in a loss, but I was happy for that city and that team because it felt like the Bruins literally took them on a ride, and they were the distraction that everybody needed after that. You know, people outside of Boston will never understand just what that felt like in the aftermath of that and what the city was like. And it was something to witness, you know. And I always say I'm going to write a book, and I when I actually get around to it, I think that's going to be a chapter. It's just, and it might be ahead of the 2011 team, just because of the way they brought everybody together. And it's one of those things like, you know, you read about in a movie or something, but it was pretty cool. But I wonder, you know, as a kid, or, you know, even as a young radio guy, was there a call that, you know, a trademark call that stood out for you that you always went back to, whether it was Fred Cusick or somebody else, whether it's baseball, hockey, any sport?
Well, I mean, to me, the best one is Al Michaels, right? You know, do you believe in miracles? I was, how old was I? I was 10, I think. I was 10 when they won the U.S. team won it in 80. I could still, to this day, if I thought about it hard enough, probably numerically list that whole team. From Steve Januzak, number 1, all the way down to Jimmy Craig, number 30. I always think Al Michaels' gold medal call, 5 seconds to the gold medal, 4 to the gold medal, this impossible dream comes true. I always think it gets kind of short shrift. But up against Do You Believe in Miracles, I understand it. So, I mean, that's the one that sticks out to me. When I was young, well, a little bit older, I remember Fred Cusick's call of Brad Park, Game 7 against Buffalo in, I don't know if it was the 83? First or second round in 83.
Yeah.
And just, you know, at the old Garden, I still get goosebumps. Somebody tweeted it out not too long ago, and I must have watched it 5 times, you know. So stuff like that always, you know, those calls always kind of stay with you, that you remember, and maybe when you're younger especially, they stick with you for, for a long time. The other thing I was going to mention, Murph, about that Game 7 against the Leafs is, the other thing that I forgot about was that was the lockout year in the NHL.
That's
right. So they didn't start until January. They played a shortened season. That first round Game 7 was in the middle of May. Right. Normally you'd be into the second, or you'd be in the third round maybe by then, right?
Yeah.
And, so the timing of all that was about a month after the marathon bombings. But anyway, I just was thinking of the timing of all that. But those calls,
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's right. I remember, too, when they lost to Chicago, it's like you walk outside and it's about 95 degrees.
It was summer. It was June 24th. It was
literally summer.
It was the first time ever, I think, might still be the only time they'd ever played. Well, COVID messed it all up. But before COVID, they played a cup final game in the summertime,
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's funny. You bring up that's funny. You just said COVID, too. I was talking to my buddy the other day, and, you get these Facebook memories that come up. They do now. And the one, I think it was a couple of days ago, came up when they started the bubble. And I said, I kind of dug the summer hockey, man. I know it can never happen again, but it wasn't bad going outside, throwing a steak on the grill, sitting on the porch, watching that. That was pretty fun. I'll tell you that. It wasn't bad.
Yeah, different. I would not have.
It was surreal.
I didn't go in the bubble, thankfully. I'm not sure how I would have been with that, but obviously the teams did, and some of the media relations people did, and
right.
But were it not for the bubble part, it probably would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, and let me ask you too. So, did you do the games from the TV then? I guess, right?
We did. So we did the round robin from T-Mobile Arena. Actually, we did 2 from T-Mobile in Vegas. We did 1 from our studio, AT&T Sportsnet, which was our station at the time.
Okay.
They were based in Denver, and we went up there because we had a couple of technical glitches, and we're like, well, let's just, let's go to Denver. And we called one of the games off from a studio there, actually from a conference room there. And then we did, because again, a local TV, you just have the first round. Right. Vegas beat Chicago in the first round in 5. And we did those games from talk about weird, an empty T-Mobile Arena. They wheeled this 55-inch screen in front of us, and Shane Knighty and I sat there and called it off. Like you'd be sitting in your living room. Very strange.
Yeah, kind of like when you're back on the baseball field or the street, eh?
Yeah, just making it up. But it was actually real games that mattered, So,
how was it hard to garner the emotion, or once the game gets going, you just sort of start to feel it and you kind of block out that, oh, it's empty in here?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, Murph, it was probably difficult, because you're in a sterile studio or in an empty building, I had them, and I always we have the effects mics in our headset. We can have that mixed in our headset. I always like them loud just because it makes you feel, I think, more a part of the game, especially in a lot of the buildings now. We have a great perch in Vegas. We're right close, but most of the places we're on the moon. So I try to have those, cranked in as much as you can without it being overwhelming. So I just tried to have our technical guys do that. It was even, what was even a little bit more strange was the next year when we started, and but there were no fans, and I can't remember the timeline, maybe the first month or 6 weeks of the season. So we'd be at T-Mobile, but the game was happening there, but it was completely empty. And it was just and Shane and I picked the 3 stars for all the home games. And there was one game where Mark Stone was the first star, but he comes out, there's nobody in the, he does the little twirl, and he waved to Shane and I. There was nobody else there, so it was just weird, bizarre. It was bizarre world.
I was just, Milan Lucic was just on Spittin' Chicklets, and they were talking about when he got his 1,000th point, and that was in COVID year, or I think it was 2021, but it was like the arenas were still empty, and they're saying, oh yeah, and you got to wave to the crowd. And he's like, what crowd? There was nobody there. That was bizarre, and you don't realize, at least I didn't. I mean, I've been going to T-Mobile here for 6 years. You don't realize how cold the building is with nobody in it, right? With no body heat. And
we froze. You can hear Rosie Gosher in the background. She always likes to make an appearance in these things.
That's all right.
But anyway, yeah, I couldn't forget how cold the building it was until you got some body heat in there. So
yeah,
anyway.
I'll tell you. So that year actually, when it went back to fans a little and transitioned into that was when Montreal beat you, right?
That is correct. 2021. Yeah, the 21 season, correct.
So let me ask you this, kind of drawing a parallel to what you were talking about to the 2011 Bruins, and how it was sort of it loops in with the Philly series and blowing. Is there some motivation that came from that loss to Montreal that carried through, whether it's through ownership, management, or even players that remained? Did you see, we got to redeem ourselves? I know it happened 2 years later, but was there sort of a buildup from there?
Yeah, I think more so, Murph. That was part of it, but I think they probably took more out of missing the playoffs the next year, right? They missed it in 22. They would have made it. They had a ridiculous amount of injuries. Stone missed the entire second half. Pacioretty missed significant time. A lot of their best players missed significant time. So, and I think that was a pretty humbling experience for them. They had done so much good in the first 4 years. Obviously, the first year was nuts, going to the Cup final as an expansion team. They got in that Game 7 debacle with San Jose in round 2 and in round 1 in 2019. The whole major penalty that wasn't even a penalty, whatever, But then they in 20 was COVID, where they lost to Dallas in the West Final in the bubble, and then the next year they lost. It wasn't, a conference final. It was the semifinals.
Campbell Conference. They went back.
The old camp of the yellow jerseys, the old orange jerseys around. Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah. So I think it was more they missing it in 22 was a big motivating factor for them. They got everyone back. They certainly had their fair share of injuries this past season, including losing Stone again, but he was able to come back. Yeah, exactly. The goalies. But to have Eichel healthy for most of the season, Alec Martinez healthy for most of the season, among most of their key guys. By the time the playoffs got going, they had most of their key guys back and ready to go.
And so they go out and they get Butch and they hire Bruce Cassidy. You obviously knew him from before, and you guys had what was that like, kind of being reunited with him?
It was funny, we called it Boston West, right? Because it was myself and Shane, and obviously Shane was on the Bruins twice and part of their Cup team in 11. We were just like, who the hell would have thunk it? You couldn't make it. I said, you can't make this crap up. And sure he is. Here he is in Vegas. And it was kind of, I was with Butch a little bit that my last year doing the Bruins, Murph, so that was in 17. They fired Claude in February of that year, 16, 17. Yeah, and Butch had come up as an assistant that year. But I had that last couple of months with him. They lost to Ottawa in the first round, and then I got the Vegas job a few months later. So, but I knew him just from he had been around forever, right? Between Providence and as a head coach and an assistant, and then up with the Bruins that year. So
even when he's scouting way back too, I used to see.
So, and it was just, it was just amazing how it just kind of all worked out the way it did. You've been around him a long time, and I've been fortunate, to know him for a good many years. And if you do what we do for a living, he's as good as it gets.
Oh, God.
There's no BS. There's no protecting the coach or the missiles.
Yeah,
he's just talking hockey, and that's refreshing in an era where that can be hard to come by. He's a different breed.
And did you see the effect he had? Did you see a change in the team instantly, or was it sort of gradual as the season went on? How did his influence sort of develop there?
Yeah, it was pretty instant, Murph. They got off. I think they were 13-2 or 13-3 out of the gates. Yep. But it was more than just their record. I mean, they started literally from day one of camp, building it from their own end out. This is how we're going to play defensively. Then they built it through the neutral zone. Then offensively, he would say they play a pretty goalie-friendly system. They try to be pretty predictable as to where the shots are going to come from. Right. I think that is one of the reasons you mentioned the 5 goalies that they were able to flourish because they were such a good team defensively, and they tried to make it as low stress on their goalies as possible. And the other piece I would say is the accountability factor. And I know that's been kind of, kicked around a lot in Boston, for lack of a better way to put it, and
Yep.
maybe the way some players took that. All I can speak to was in Vegas. Guys got the message, and it came through. I mean, I remember in the preseason, guys like Jonathan Marchessault and Phil Kessel in exhibition games. Yep. There were times they might take a seat for 3 or 4 minutes if they weren't playing the way that Bruce wanted to play. And I think it's one thing to grab the low-hanging fruit, but I mean, you're talking about Kessel, who's been around forever, and Marchessault ended up winning the Conn Smythe. So the accountability factor for that group, I think they probably needed a little bit of that, and he delivered, and they delivered.
And it looks like, I mean, by all accounts, and he was on here a couple of weeks ago, and he told us, but when he got hired, he's down the Cape, and Eichel, I guess, had been there for a wedding or something, so they met up. And I mean, look, Jack Eichel to me is always, I've watched him since he was a young kid. He played for my buddy Chris Masters out in the junior Bruins there in Marlborough. And the kid, obviously, we know his offensive skills, but there was a little, sometimes he wouldn't go back, take care of the defensive end. And he was just a different person, a different player. Like it was unreal. And, I don't think it's fair to him to compare him. Bruce mentioned he tried to teach him via video of Bergeron. But you did see, I mean, there are similarities in how he approached the game that it did rub off on him. Whatever Bruce said to him, whatever he learned from those videos and picking Butch's brain, it worked.
Yeah, I think that probably the message to Jack, and I don't think I don't know if Bruce has ever said this, but I think it was probably, look, you can be one of the best two-way players in the game. You're a good enough skater. In 3 strides, he's gone. Right? It might be 2 strides, he's gone. Yeah. And I think he kind of took that to heart. And, Jack would tell you that there was one time, I don't know, late in the year. And look, full disclosure, I like Jack a lot. We've got the New England ties, the BU tie. He did a one and done at BU, so we talked BU quite a bit. But he said to me at one point during the year, he goes, well, I was either going to play the way he wanted or I wasn't going to play. So I think that was kind of
you made the right choice.
That was the message, But I think what he learned from that probably was you can be a dependable player at both ends of the ice, but still he led the whole league in playoff points.
Yep.
You can do that without sacrificing your offensive part of your game. I think that was the point that they got across was our offense is gonna come from playing good defense.
Yeah.
And getting going as a unit up the ice. So I think of all the, Bruce had a positive impact on a lot of guys, but I think Jack would be, right up there, pretty high on the list.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I thought another thing, I saw him a lot more often, obviously, when he was with Buffalo. And, I know people, and there was so much BS going on about him out there. A lot of rumors. It's just all rumors. But still, it rubbed on him, and you could tell he was so done with it there. And he just seemed so refreshed, like a new lease on life. And it's crazy to say at his age to say that, but it did. It just seemed like he literally turned a page and went into another chapter. And I'm happy for him. It was a great story. And that's just another example too, I think, of Bruce's coaching, where he can take a kid like that and say, that's behind you. This is what you got to do to not go back to that, so.
Yeah. Well, and he went, the first year so they made the trade, he hadn't, I'm trying to remember now, he hadn't had the surgery yet. That was the main issue with Buffalo, right?
Yeah.
So then he had it not long after the trade and then played like the second half of that season and led the team in scoring from that point to the end of the year. But I still think it was, you're trying to play catch up, right? You're still, you're jumping into games. I want to say Jack didn't play until, I could be a little off, but like late January, maybe, and early February, whatever it was. So then, as much as it was a disappointment that they missed the playoffs, he had a whole, not that he wanted to have more time off, but, you get your summer training in and then, be able to play a full season. So, the other part probably would be Murph is, his time in Buffalo. Look, it is when being around some of the Bruins teams earlier in my career there, losing, I think it just wears on you. It's a long season, and if you're, and I think he had had enough of the narrative. He had never played in the playoffs. Well, his first year in the playoffs, he wins the Stanley Cup. So I think for him, that was pretty good validation. But also, yeah, to your point, I think it was a new, fresh lease on his career. To your, as you mentioned, it's still at a young age.
Yeah, for sure. So, they get to the Cup final. And look, all respect to Florida, that was a great run they had, but you could tell early on this team was on a mission, this Vegas team, and Florida had met their match, in my opinion. That's at least how I saw the series. And they get there, but you're not behind the mic. What was that like?
Yeah, it's weird, right? It's I say it's an odd experience, Murph, just in that. Look, I love my job now more than I could tell you, and I wouldn't change a thing. I love doing TV. I love Vegas, and we have an unbelievable life out there. The only odd dynamic is after the first round, they kick you to the curb on local hit the bricks, you know? So that was a little strange. But, we continued to travel and did different pregame shows, postgame hits. So we were still around and still a part of it. I traveled to Edmonton for games 3 and 4 of the second round, which probably was their most difficult series, I was in Dallas for game 6, so I was able to be downstairs when they beat Dallas to win the West. And then obviously in the Cup final, we traveled. So I'll tell you a funny little story. So Shane and I had some great friends that have a suite at T-Mobile Arena. So after the first round, we're just like, I was like, I don't want to go up to the press box and watch it at home, So we said to our friend, hey, do you have any room in there for a couple of stragglers? And he's like, absolutely. So once they started winning, and they kept winning in the playoffs, it got to the point where he was superstitious and said, you have to watch the game from our suite, right? So sure enough, when they won it in game 5 over Florida, we were standing in his suite. So it was pretty cool.
Did he ask you to do like a mock play-by-play? Or what?
No, well, people in there were like, do you call the game when you're not calling the game? And like, you know what? I've gotten better of just like turning my brain off. Like
enjoying it,
Shane and I will watch it and we might have our own little running commentary with each other on who's good, who's not so good that night, what's going on in the game. But no, it was it was really cool to kind of, as great as it would have been to call it, obviously. I'll tell you what, Murph, when they lost game 3 in overtime in Florida and they were up late and they lost, they gave up the lead late and then lost in overtime. I will tell you the first thing I thought of was, well, this will give them a chance to win it at home in game 5.
Yeah.
They had to take care of business in game 4 and they did. And then game 5 was just was a pretty thorough beating. So it was I was psyched that for those fans who love that team so much and have since day one, for them to be great with them winning it at home was awesome.
And you bring up those fans, Goucher, and we'll wrap this up soon, but you bring up those fans, like, to me, I think one of the biggest question marks, obviously, when they went out there, an expansion team, and also that Vegas is such a tourist destination. I think I remember people talking about it. Would almost be a detriment to the team? Will they get more visitors, fans in there, and will they take over the building because you've always got people from different areas coming? And yet they just seem to have this foundation of fans from the get-go there. How did that sort of originate?
Yeah, it's a couple of parts to it, Murph. I think one would be, and look, you've been to Vegas. I had been to Vegas probably 3 or 4 times before I moved there. It's one thing to take a long weekend, right?
Right.
And you go do your gambling, go to a show, do your thing, have a few drinks, and then you gotta go back. You gotta go back from whence you came. If you live there, that's not your experience. Like we live out in Red Rock Canyon, about 20 miles west of the Strip out in the mountains. It's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Quality of life is great. And what I realized was, talking to people that have been there a lot longer than me, is people were looking for their own identity away from the Strip, because that's not, if you live in Vegas, that's, I love it. I love to be able to, you dabble in it. You go down for a great show, you go down for a great meal, but So people wanted their own team. Good on the NHL, they got there first.
Yep.
And then the other part of it that was, albeit for a horrendous reason, were the shootings at Mandalay Bay on October 1st. And that was 5 days before their first ever game, 5 or 6 days, right before their first game they're ever going to play. So I think I'll kind of tie it back into the marathon bombings in Boston in 2013. I remember thinking,
I was just going to ask you.
Yeah. And I was like, I can't believe this is, going through this. Yeah. But I did remember thinking, look, the Bruins in 13 and I'll even the Red Sox ended up winning it that fall, right? They won the World Series. Sports has an ability to give people 3 hours a day to think about something else. The other 21 hours might suck. And I'm sure for so many people it did, but at least the team, and give them something, just something to watch. And, So I think what the team did as well is, what do you do in those scenarios? You just try to give your time, go visit with the team was unbelievable. First responders, victims, families, victims, people that were recovering. So I think that really kind of cemented the whole bond between the team and the community. That I don't think that'll ever be broken. So they kind of, there was this wave of energy that they rode early that year. And, I think they were 8-1 through their first 9 and, then obviously went all the way to the finals. So I think that a couple of things, they're huge on the Vegas born thing out there. You can't go 5 minutes without seeing a Golden Knights bumper sticker, license plate, t-shirt, hat.
Right.
It's unbelievable. It's nuts. Not to diminish, the Raiders are there now and it's fine. I went to the Raiders Pats game last year and went to a Raiders Chiefs game a couple of years ago. The A's, it looks like, are coming. And that's all fine, because I do think that what's the rising tide raises all the boats. I like that.
Yep.
But it is different. They love that hockey team out there because it's their own team. It originated there. It wasn't it's personal to them. Yeah. It's not a team that relocated. Nothing that happens these days. But the hockey team's a whole different story. How just how deeply passionate and how deeply they care about that team.
And so, what was that parade or rally like?
Oh, it was nuts. Yeah, it was. Well, and I'll tell you, Vegas, it's funny, Murph. I tell people Vegas isn't that big. It's not. It's not Boston big, or no. But like the Bruins parade. Side story: I ran into Marty Walsh, who's now the executive director of the Players Association. I ran into him during the finals, right? So I was talking to Marty, and I said, he told me the Bruins parade in 11 was still the biggest parade the city's ever had. And they've had a lot over the last 20 plus years. So anyway, but in Vegas, they had over 250,000. I think they had 250,000 people there. And, once you got to the heart of it, Caesars, Cosmo, the Bellagio, they were 30 deep along the sidewalk. And it was just, and it kind of brought back memories of the Bruins parade. I remember being on the duck boat in Boston, going down Boylston Street, because you go down it the wrong way. They shut it down. You go down the one way, the other way, And we had some beverages on there, and you try to make eye contact with people and, hey, can you catch this? And you throw them a Bud Light and they would chug it, so. And then Shane and I emceed the parade. emceed the rally at Toshiba Plaza. And there were it's like 20,000 people, Jim. All you could see were people. Most of the team was fairly intoxicated, but as they should be. They just won the Stanley Cup.
Except for William Karlsson, right?
Except for Karlsson. Well, I'll tell you a funny little. So he comes up to me, and in real time, it all kind of is happening so fast,
right?
So he comes up to me, shirtless, but he wasn't the only one shirtless.
Yeah.
And says, "Hey, I'm going to introduce Marchie." I said, "Okay, Jonathan Marchessault."
Yeah.
So I said, "Okay." And because he said, I want to introduce him and get an MVP chant going. I said, yeah, fine. But that was the extent of the conversation. I don't realize until he gets the microphone. I'm like, oh God.
Uh-oh.
So then a couple of people are trying to pull the plug on him. And I didn't have a problem with it. My first memory of a parade was when the Celtics won in 81.
Oh, yeah.
And Larry Bird got up there at City Hall Plaza because Moses Malone said, I can get 4 guys from my high school team and beat the Celtics.
Yep.
And Larry Bird said, Moses Malone eat shit. That's what I remember, So I'm like, it's fine. It's just me. I don't have, but whatever.
Right.
I didn't have a problem with it. So anyway, he's up there. So then Marcia's still standing next to me, and I'm like, I said to him, "Hey, can you speak?" And he said, "Not really." And I said, "Well, you're gonna have to figure out pretty quick because we're pulling the plug on him." And actually, he got up there and he was fine. So it was just, it's everything you'd think it would be, right? It's awesome. It's having a chance to kind of be around a team that did it again, albeit. And so somebody put this math together for me, Murph. I didn't. P. Bruins won the Calder Cup in '99. 12 years later, the Bruins won the Cup in 2011. 12 years later, the Golden Knights won the Cup in 2023.
Wow.
So I would never have thought of it. I guess it just means I'm getting old, but it's just to be part of those.
12 years from now?
I don't know. I hope maybe retired. We'll see. But anyway, yeah, it's pretty just unbelievable. To be a part of that ride again.
That's great, man. Well, congratulations. Oh, and did you get a day with the Cup?
I haven't yet. I will tell you. It looks like we're going to have some time with it. It looks like in October. Our broadcasters and communications crew in Vegas. Yeah, I would, if it was up to me, I would have it here and take it to some of my favorite spots in South County, Rhode Island. But it's not up to me, which is fine. Nor should it be. But to have, I think we're going to have a little time with it in October out in Vegas, which would be great.
Yeah. See, I thought they would have because they were doing that whole sort of little New England swing there.
Yeah.
With Jack and Butch. So.
Yeah, and I get it. Look, first and foremost, players and coaches and the hockey ops people that really make it happen. The TV schmucks, if they can get a little time with it.
Where is it now? Do you know?
I don't know that. Last I knew, it was in Saskatchewan.
Okay.
I don't know where it is today. There was talk it was going to Sweden maybe next week for William Karlsson. But day to day, I haven't been kept day to day abreast of the Cup tour. But I know it's made the rounds for sure.
I'll tell you this quick, Goucher, and I told Butch when I had him on. My daughter was born just under a month after the Bruins won the Cup. She was July 12th of that year. And a month later, they let the media have a little photo op with the Cup at the Garden. I mean, I've been to a couple parties too, but I wasn't bringing my infant daughter to those. No. And so we brought her in and take a pitch. And I think it must, I forget who said to do it. Somebody says, put her in it. So we did it. Put her in the Cup. We got it. Next day, it's on the front page of the Herald. So then a year later, I had a buddy of mine, he's a scout for the Kings, and they bring it back. They're in Charlestown. He says, bring Maddie down. Let's make it 2 years straight. We got her in the Cup again. And so,
that's awesome.
I've told her story many times, but that's great. She slept over one night. She came up for the weekend, and she's staying here. And she's watching. I was showing her the whole celebration that you guys had. And she goes, so I was really in that twice? And I said,
yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. Anytime you can be around it, I just love seeing people's reactions. It's unbelievable. It never gets old, right? You think about
it doesn't.
And that's the thing. Yeah, no matter who wins, and it's to be around a team that wins it is even even more special. Great. But so we were kind of talking as a staff earlier today, actually, about if we get a little time within October, maybe a little plan to hit a couple spots with it, which would be great.
Good. Enjoy, my man. Enjoy.
All right,
I appreciate you taking the time, Goucher, and good to see you. And when I get out to Vegas, I hope I'll come out for the Bruins Knights game. We'll hook up.
That'd be great. That'd be awesome. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Dave Goucher from the Vegas Golden Knights joining us here. I'm Jimmy Murphy. We'll talk to you next week.